This is Walmart's on-branded 8.1-inch Android tablet for 2026. Hey everyone, Retro Tech Dad here, and I did a little shopping at Walmart and got myself a new compact tablet. And you know what that means, it's time to make a return to the world of Android tablets. I've had a few viewers over on Discord that shared this new tablet with me for sale by Walmart. And then, of course, talking to some of my good friends, and basically I caved in and picked this up so we can all take a look at it together. Peer pressure is definitely a real thing. Anyways, what I've got here is Walmart's on-branded 8.1-inch Core tablet for 2026, and you can see that this is an Android-based tablet, and there's definitely a few interesting things about it. So let's talk about the specs quickly, and for those unaware, Walmart and ONN have been releasing these budget tablets for a few years now, and this is the updated 2026 model that features an 8.1-inch 1000 by 1524 IPS touchscreen. And that resolution and aspect ratio is a bit unusual, but what we've got is a 3:2 aspect ratio display, which I really like for tablets and something similar that we've seen on the iPad mini, for example. This also supports up to 90 Hz with a 350 nits max brightness and a 226 ppi. I'm pretty impressed by how nice this panel looks in person with really solid viewing angles, colors, and while it's not as high resolution, I don't think it's going to be much of an issue at this size. We do get a 2.4 GHz octa-core processor, but what's interesting is that this is actually a Snapdragon 685 with Adreno 610 graphics. Now what's wild is that there's zero marketing or advertising of this Snapdragon chip anywhere on the packaging, and on the Walmart's website it's actually buried under multiple layers of details, which I finally found way down on the page. But this should prove a bit interesting for what we do best here on the channel, which is going to be gaming focused. This tablet comes packed with 6GB of RAM, which hilariously has more RAM than that Walmart HP laptop that I just looked at recently, and then 64GB of internal storage, but we do have support for storage expansion with a microSD card. There's a very unexciting 2-megapixel front camera and a 5-megapixel rear-facing camera, and really I don't expect much out of these tablets, especially the budget ones, so they are serviceable at best. The packaging does claim up to 15 hours of battery life, but I have no clue what those testing conditions are for the claim, and lastly, ONN does provide a 1-year limited warranty. Finally, I did purchase this from the Walmart website for $138 new, and these do seem to be rolling out to Walmart stores, but it's also readily available from their website. Alright, let's get this seal peeled off carefully and then check out what we get inside the box. I've always been impressed by how these are packaged. I know it seems a bit silly, but the presentation here is nice with a little flap to gently lift the tablet out of the tray. On the front of this protective sleeve, we have those specs that I just talked about, and then on the back, we can see the color that I selected, which is the mocha brown peeking through. By the way, this tablet is available in 4 different colors, including the brown here, silver, navy, and pink. We've got a very wide quick start guide that details some basic information to help you get familiar with your new tablet. And then we've got a USB-A to USB-C cable that is actually color matched to the tablet, which is a really nice touch and something that Walmart has done in the past with the ONN branded tablets. I appreciate little details like that, and it's cool to see in a cheap tablet like this. Finally, we've got the microSD eject tool, since this does use a tray to store the microSD card. Whoops, almost forgot that there's a single serving of the silica packet, which is included here. Alright, shall we peel this sleeve off and then power on this tablet for the first time so we can take a quick look at Android 16, which powers this tablet. Thanks to the magic of editing, we can blow right past the boring setup process and get to the home screen of Android. And the nice thing about this build of Android is that it is a very clean and vanilla install of Android 16, with just the Walmart app as being the only real addition here, and it can be easily removed if that's not your thing. Other than that, we have the normal preloaded Google apps and pretty much nothing else. The OS feels nice and peppy for use, and I think really for many who might want to consider this for light consumption like web browsing, email, YouTube viewing, streaming shows and movies with the usual apps, since this does support Widevine L1, as well as reading, which this tablet does have a dedicated reading mode option in the quick access. There's a lot of value here to be had for the price point, and will probably serve most who don't necessarily need the most powerful tablet on the market. The build quality is really nice and uses an all aluminum build. It's got a really lightweight design and it just feels good in the hands, and it's compact enough, especially for one-handed use. But what about those of us that might be looking for a value when it comes to gaming focused features? And so first, let's gear up and quickly explore some telescopic controller options that will fit and work with this 8.1-inch tablet, and because of its smaller size, we have a fairly large amount of controllers to choose from, which is pretty nice, as there's basically something for everyone's budget, as well as preference in terms of size, comfort, and features. I rounded up 4 different options here, starting from the cheapest to the most expensive, and I've got the GameSir X5 Lite, the GameSir X5S, the Absolute S8, and then the Absolute S9, and you'll notice that I've got a Bluetooth and then a USB-C option for each brand, since there are those that might want the hardwire option, but if you're looking to do some vertical gaming with a tablet for something like Nintendo DS emulation, then you're going to need a Bluetooth controller for that. All 4 of these controllers work great with the ONN tablet and have no trouble accommodating its size, and really it just comes down to what you're looking for in terms of price and size. I've talked a lot about these controllers on the channel over time, so I don't want to spend too much time here, but I just want to quickly show that these are all available options to help transform this tablet into a solid gaming device. So we're now ready to dive into some Android gaming first and check out a few popular games from the Play Store, and then of course we will continue on with other gaming use cases. Now the 64 gigabytes of internal storage does make things a little bit tricky, so you're going to either want to format your micro SD card as internal storage, just as a little tip. Otherwise, you will be limited to what you can keep on the device at the same time, and some of these Android games are definitely getting up there in terms of storage size. So there's a bunch of Android games that I typically like to test out on tablets like this, and so I actually had a hard time really choosing which games I wanted to highlight here and test. But I did try to run through some of the more popular games, and you've probably seen on screen a few of the regulars like Genshin Impact, Call of Duty Mobile, and Fortnite. As I expected, the Snapdragon 685 is a pretty low power chip, and so expect that for most of the heavier Android games like Genshin Impact, you're going to need to run the games at the lowest settings possible. By the way, be prepared to spend a solid hour or more just getting Genshin installed on the device. This definitely took longer than I'm used to seeing. I was also a bit underwhelmed by the Fortnite performance, as I've got the game set to the lowest settings possible, and I actually had to go back and set the frame rate to a 20 frames per second cap to keep it a bit smoother, since it was struggling to keep up at times. Warframe is another game I've been using as a test game more recently since it's finally on the Play Store, and this was pretty rough, as I've got the game set to the lowest settings, but I had to scale the resolution way down just to get it to this playable point, which is pretty rough visually. Finally, I did test Destiny Rising, but unfortunately the game won't load past a certain point due to the GPU limitation of the Snapdragon 685, and honestly, based on what I've seen with these heavier games, I wouldn't expect much here even if it did work. Thankfully, there are lots of great premium games that have been ported over to the Android platform and are now available on the Play Store, and some of the games that I tested like Halls of Torment, Gambonanza, and Ball X Pit, which I was reluctant to start playing again because of a former addiction to it, all work quite well here, and these indie-style games are definitely a great fit. And speaking of great fits, let's talk about some emulation, and I'm going to start out with the lightest test for this showcase, but one that I think is an awesome fit for this tablet, which is some Game Boy Advance emulation. And I'm actually featuring Game Boy Advance since we have a 3:2 aspect ratio display, which is the same as what the Game Boy Advance used, and because of that, this is a great display to enjoy these games with, and the pixels are just super crispy and sharp looking on this display, and it's definitely a real treat to enjoy GBA on a larger panel like this. So let's take it up a little bit in terms of power and PlayStation Portable emulation with the PP-SSPP emulator, and PSP is definitely possible here with the Snapdragon 685. And I'd say as a safe range, expect that most games will run at least native resolution, with many being able to enjoy some upscaling of at least 2x, and then for the lightest games at around 3x. With a little bit of tinkering, you can even enjoy games like God of War, Chains of Olympus at 2 times the native resolution by making use of the 30 frames per second cheat, and I do recommend trying to target at least 2 times native resolution, since the PSP's native resolution does look pretty rough on this display. And while we're still talking about PlayStation, let's check out some PlayStation 2 emulation using Nether SX2, and yes, amazingly, the Snapdragon 685 can handle some PlayStation 2 emulation. And I say some because realistically, I'd say the lighter games will fare well, so things like Alien Hominid and Ape Escape 2 work quite well. I say that you're probably going to want to stick to PAL region ROMs for most of the titles to squeeze as much performance as you can. For example, I've got Ape Escape 2 running with the PAL region ROM, but I'm able to do a little bit of upscaling, and so it is a good compromise. Let's switch on over to the Nintendo side and check out some GameCube emulation using the Dolphin emulator from the Play Store. And for a device like this, you might be able to get some more performance by using some of the forks available, but in general, I find that mainline Dolphin from the Play Store is so good that it's probably not going to yield much better results. As I expected, GameCube does fare a little bit better than PlayStation 2 emulation in terms of how far we can push it, But we do have a ceiling here with performance, and the entirety of the GameCube library will not be possible here, so something like F-Zero GX will not run as well, but it does look like we have some room to enjoy games like Wave Race Blue Storm, Mario Kart Double Dash, and Mario Power Tennis as some examples with just occasional dips here and there, which is pretty solid. And because I'm crazy, I always love to see just how far we can really push something, and I did test some Nintendo Switch emulation using the Eden emulator, and of course, as expected, this is the absolute limit of emulation here. Amazingly, I was able to get something very light like Celeste and even Box Boy and Box Girl to run, but that's at the cost of running it at a 0.5x native resolution. So it's certainly fun to explore, but I don't think you'll be getting much beyond that outside of the absolute lightest games. By the way, I am using the Mr. Purple Turnip drivers, which yielded better results for me than just the stock system drivers. Despite all this, we still can't quite hit a solid 60 frames per second in a light game like Box Boy. Before we move on, there's just one last thing I always love showcasing, which is taking the tablet and turning it into its vertical orientation for some TATE mode gaming. With this orientation, we can enjoy some awesome shmups, but probably for most viewers out there, the curiosity here is to use this for Nintendo DS and even Nintendo 3DS. For Nintendo DS, we have plenty of power on hand here to enjoy the vast library of Nintendo DS games, and I'm even using Melon DS, which surprisingly the Snapdragon 685 can handle. By the way, you might have noticed I switched to one of the Bluetooth controller options so that we can actually do this. Now for Nintendo 3DS emulation, I'm using Azahar, and I'd say that this is right at the edge of performance for what's possible with this tablet. But I was pleasantly surprised since I was able to enjoy games like Super Mario 3D Land and Mario Kart 7 at native resolution, and I thought that performance was solid. Personally for me, and I've mentioned this before, but I prefer 3DS games in the horizontal format so that I can get the larger top screen, since there were far more games on the 3DS that didn't really rely on that bottom screen. You'd think that after all of the Android gaming emulation, we'd be done with the gaming possibilities here, but surprisingly we can actually talk about some PC gaming on this tablet thanks to the presence of that Snapdragon 685, which really does open the doors to this thanks to the superior driver support of the Adreno GPU. I easily had the most fun exploring what's possible here, and thanks to all the advancements with PC gaming on Android, with things like GameHub and GameNative, it's remarkable that this is even a possibility on a $138 tablet from Walmart. I kept it to lighter games, since realistically you're not going to be running Cyberpunk 2077 on here. I mean, you can try, but I wouldn't recommend it. But games like Shovel Knight Pocket Dungeon, Geometry Wars 3, and even a fairly new release with Vampire Crawlers, which doesn't have an Android version currently, ran pretty well. For Vampire Crawlers, I did have to take it down to a 960 by 544 resolution, but it was a fairly stable 30 frames per second experience, and I'm shocked it works this well. And it's kind of awesome considering we don't have an Android version right now, and I was actually having a lot of fun playing it on here. Now let's just come back down a bit here, and while a lot of games will run and launch, we just don't have enough power to get them at least close to 30 frames per second for it to be playable. But I'm shocked at how many were almost there, and honestly shocked at how many launched and even went in-game. It really shows you how far we've come, but also how important driver support is, which even the entry-level Snapdragon chips have an advantage over something with a more powerful Dimensity, for example. Finally, and while it might be the last topic, it's certainly not the least, and I think many will be considering this tablet for game streaming locally from a more powerful PC. And I have to say it's quite a nice experience with average decoding times at about 9 milliseconds to 11 milliseconds. And I did test a few games, including the game that I'm currently addicted to, which is Forza Horizon 6, and this was a pretty solid experience, allowing me to enjoy the game using the native resolution of the tablet with 90 frames per second thanks to the 90Hz refresh rate that we have here with the on-tablet's display. I also tested it out with my usual Hades 2 since there's a lot of action on screen and it's pretty chaotic at times. But it held up during testing, and so this is a great setup for someone that might want to do occasional game streaming to their couch or maybe when in bed without needing to rely on a dedicated handheld or a more expensive option. The around 9 milliseconds to 11 milliseconds is certainly not the lowest decoding time that I've tested here on the channel, but it's just right at what I would consider solid enough that for most it's not going to be an issue, and really the strength of your own internal network setup will matter far more. Now, one weird thing I did notice while using this tablet is there was a weird issue where the sound would get very crackly and distorted, and at first I thought it was just the specific app that I was using, which at the time was PPSSPP. But then I started to experience it in other apps like Nether SX2, which I've actually recorded here as an example. I've found that the issue goes away when you do a hard shutdown on the device and then power it back on, so not just a simple restart. I don't know for sure if it's just an issue with my unit, and maybe a factory reset of Android will help, but it's something I will be asking around about to see if any others might have experienced the same thing, and it's definitely something I wanted to share and mention to my viewers, in case you are considering this unit, that this is something that happened frequently during my testing, and it was definitely annoying to deal with. So we've reached the end of this video, and I think the 2026 edition of the ONN 8.1-inch Core tablet is going to be great for most users, as it provides a nice balance of features that goes along with a fairly reasonable price point that I imagine will be an even better value when sales inevitably happen in the future. It's certainly not a powerhouse, but for those that don't mind tinkering a little, you might be able to get more out of that Snapdragon 685 than you think. I hope you enjoyed this video. Until the next time, as always, I am the Retro Tech Dad, and thank you so much for watching.